In our previous video, we discussed how we are going to solve polynomial equations when they're in factored form. Now, in this upcoming video, we are just going to discuss how we are going to solve polynomial equations if they're not fully in factored form. So we are just going to start with some of these ones that look like this. So we have 4x to the fourth plus 24x cubed. Now let's just start by finding the greatest common factor, the greatest common monomial factor from these two things. So that greatest common factor, I'm first going to look at my numbers. What's a number that I can pull out there? Well, 4 goes into both 4 and 24. So I can pull a 4 to the outside and add in those parentheses. And when I take that 4 away, I only have 1 left, and we're going to leave that off. And then I have 6x cubed. Now, I pulled out my coefficient. Next, I want to look at my variable here. I have x to the fourth, which really is 4 x's, and x to the third, which is 3 x's. And I want to pull something out of this. Now, if I have 4 here and 3 here, I can take 3 from both of those and pull them to the outside. So really what we have here is 4x to the third times x plus 6. And that's what it would be if I factored out the greatest common monomial. Now, I could factor out something else, but I want the greatest common one. And that's everything that's in common between those things. So as I have that thing that's in common between those two things pulled out, that's how I would factor it. Now, when we're talking about solving something like this, what we would do is say this was equal to 0. Well, I'm just going to leave it equal to 0 the whole time until I get to this. Now, notice how I now have a factored polynomial here. So I have 2 polynomials that I'm finding the product of. This is now in factored form. And we know how to solve this when it's in factored form. All I have to do is take each of these parts and set them equal to 0. Now notice here how I have this 4x cubed equals 0. Now anytime I have a monomial here, what's going to end up happening is x is going to equal 0. Now I can show you how we do that because we can divide by 4 and then get x cubed equals 0. Now what number multiplied by itself 3 times equals 0? That's what we're asking ourselves. I can also undo a cube by doing a cubed root. So if I do the cubed root to both of these things and put it in my calculator, I end up getting x equals 0. Okay, and that's going to work anytime I have a monomial equal to 0. X is always going to be 0 because remember, a monomial means I'm not adding anything. And then we have our x plus 6, and I get my other solution of x equals -6. And those are our 2 solutions there. So in this video, that's all that we're covering, is we're going to cover how to factor when we have a binomial here, how we're going to factor a binomial by taking out the greatest common monomial and then find the solution to that. So let's do it again with these 2. I'm going to do A all together, and then I want you to try B on your own. So right here, I have 2x squared plus 8x equals 0. Now the first thing that I want to do is factor my greatest common factor out. So a 2 goes into both of those. There's an x in both of them. If I pull that 2 and that x out, what do I have left? Well, here all I have left is an x, and here I have left a 4. And then my second step, now that it's in factored form, all I have to do is set each polynomial equal to 0. So now I'm going to do 2x equals 0, and x plus 4 equals 0, and then I can solve that. Divide by 2, and I get x equals 0. Remember, it was a monomial, so we knew it was going to be 0, and then subtract our 4 on both sides. Now, a lot of people will factor this out here, and then they get this x equals 0. But make sure that you also set this x plus 4 equal to 0, because that is another solution. Both x minus 4 and x equals 0 do work in this solution. So I want you to try part B all on your own. Here we have 6n squared equals 15n. Now before you try this one on your own and pause the video, what I want you to notice is how this is not equal to 0. So what I want to do here is I actually want to make this equal to 0 to start. So I'm going to subtract 15n. I want to move that 15n from this side to that side. And when I move that, 15n minus 15n is 0. And then I end up with 6n squared minus 15n. So now that we're at this stage here, I want you to pause the video, factor the greatest common factor out of 6n squared minus 15n, and then solve that polynomial. After you finish doing that, unpause the video and move on. Okay, hopefully you had a chance to try this one on your own. Now notice that very first thing that we did here is I moved that over, and after I did that, I had to factor. That's our step 1. And what I noticed was in both of these is I can pull a 3 out because 3 goes into 6 and it goes into negative 15. And I can also pull out an n because there's an n on this end. So I ended up getting 3n for my first polynomial and n minus 5 for my other one. So then in step 2, remember, we're going to set those both equal to 0. So 3n equals 0, which means that n equals 0, because I just divide by 3 here. Divide by 3. In this case, I've got 2n minus 5 equals 0, and I need to get that n all by itself. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides, divide by 2, and I got n equals 5/2. Now notice these solutions are not always going to be integers. They're not always going to be these pretty numbers, but that is our solution. So I would challenge you that as you get your solution, leave it as a fraction, okay? Figure out, divide it, leave it as a fraction, and you will be good to go. But make sure, notice here, we had 2 solutions. You should have at least 2 solutions. The only time when you don't have 2 solutions is when you have something that's squared. In that case, we only have 1 solution. But if it doesn't have this square and we have 2 parts, then you are going to have 2 unique solutions every single time. If you only have 1 solution, go back and check to make sure you have the other. And that is how, when we're given a binomial like this, we can factor and then solve by finding that greatest common factor.